the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, a vast and isolated expanse of dense forests, ancient rock formations, and endless stretches of wilderness, has always carried an air of mystery. It's a place where the thin line between civilization and raw nature blurs, where myths breathe through the rustling leaves, and legends linger in the foggy hollows. The locals whisper stories about what lurks deep within those woods, things that don't make it into history books or wildlife documentaries. It was into this desolate heart that I found myself driving a 26-foot box truck, its cargo bay heavy with 12 industrial machines. My task was simple: deliver and install. Nothing more. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The truck had been giving me trouble the day before, stuttering, the engine coughing like it was on its last breath. I had taken it back to the rental company, hoping for some kind of fix, and was met with that typical corporate assurance: "She's good to go." I should have known better. But I was behind schedule, drowning under deadlines, and determined to push through. So I left the small town I had last stopped in, the lights of civilization disappearing behind me, swallowed by the abyss of the wilderness. By the time night fully fell, I was deep into the Upper Peninsula. The kind of deep where no streetlights exist, where cell service flickers like a dying ember, and the nearest sign of life could be dozens of miles away. The state route twisted and coiled through endless pine forests, their towering silhouettes clawing at the ink-black sky like jagged fingers. My headlights were a fragile shield against the swallowing dark, cutting through the void with a brittle, almost useless beam. Every dip and rise in the road felt like it led deeper into some abyss, each turn swallowing me further from anything familiar. It was cold, February cold. That brutal, merciless cold that seeps into your bones, slipping through the tiniest cracks in the cab no matter how high the heat blasted. Frost had already begun to web across the corners of the windshield, creeping in delicate, spidery patterns, the kind you know will only thicken if you stop for too long. The sky above was a hollow black dome, heavy with the weight of a moonless night, and clouds hung low, swollen and gray, threatening snow. The radio had long since gone silent, its signal strangled by the miles of wilderness. All that was left was the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the occasional crack of branches snapping in the frigid wind. The loneliness was palpable, a heavy, suffocating thing that pressed down on my chest. It wasn't the kind of isolation you feel when you're simply alone. This was deeper, primal, the type of solitude that awakens some ancient part of your brain that knows, instinctively, that you're far from safety. My mind began to wander, filling the void with thoughts I didn't want. Every tree seemed to lean in closer, the skeletal branches stretching like bony arms over the road, trying to close it off. Shadows flickered at the edges of the headlights, darting and merging in unnatural shapes, their forms just indistinct enough to make me second-guess what I was seeing. My eyes darted constantly to the mirrors. Nothing. Just the empty road, stretching behind me like an endless scar in the landscape. But still, there was that feeling, an itch at the base of my skull, that something was out there. Watching. Waiting. Every so often, the monotony would fracture, but not in any comforting way. Once, the headlights caught the glassy reflection of an animal's eyes far off the road, two glowing orbs, unmoving, staring straight at me from between the trees. It didn't flinch. It didn't run. It simply watched, the distance between us an unknown that felt suddenly too small. Then, out of nowhere, every single light on the dashboard flared to life in a violent, synchronized blaze of reds and oranges. The check engine light, the battery, the oil pressure, all of them ignited at once, an orchestra of alarms screaming in a blinding, chaotic warning. The dashboard flickered like a dying heart monitor, strobing in rapid succession before locking into a steady, furious glow. The radio fizzled into static, the heater fans coughed once, and then the engine let out a deep, mechanical groan, the sound thick and choking, like it was gasping for breath. It fought for a beat longer, just enough to give me hope, before it gave up entirely in a guttural sputter, a sick, final death rattle that vibrated through the steel frame of the truck. The silence that followed was violent, The truck coasted forward for a few ghostly feet before the sheer weight dragged it to a dead halt. The momentum died, and then, nothing. No rumble of the engine, no comforting hum of the heater, no music, not even the soft whir of the dashboard electronics. Just a vast, cavernous silence that swallowed everything. The cold crept in instantly, seeping through the vents, raw and merciless. The only sound that remained was the sharp, mechanical clicking of the hazard lights, their pulse slow and deliberate, each beat a hollow echo in the stillness. Outside, the amber flashes cut into the darkness, illuminating the twisted silhouettes of trees that loomed on either side of the road, their shadows stretching long, claw-like fingers across the cracked asphalt. With every flash, the world outside seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like I was trapped in some broken reel of film, stuttering between frames. I sat there, frozen behind the wheel, every hair on my body standing on end. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might rupture through my chest. The cold metal of the steering wheel bit into my palms, but I didn't loosen my grip. The isolation was absolute, no headlights behind me, no distant glow ahead, just me in the oppressive dark, now a living, breathing thing that pressed in from all sides. I tried the ignition again. A desperate act. The key turned, the starter clicked, a dry, lifeless snap, but the engine didn't even try. No cough, no grind, nothing but hollow resistance. It was dead. Completely, irrevocably dead. The panic didn't come all at once. It slithered in, slow and suffocating. I grabbed my phone. 1 bar. Of course. I fumbled to dial, my breath fogging in the cold air, fingertips numb with a mixture of cold and fear. The first call dropped. The second rang twice before the signal cut out. On the third try, I finally got through to someone, dispatch, maybe, or roadside assistance. I couldn't even focus on who it was. My voice cracked as I explained the situation, the words tumbling out too fast. 2 to 3 hours, they told me. That's how long it would take for a mechanic to reach me. I could already feel that time stretching out like a yawning abyss. 2 to 3 hours, alone, in the dead heart of the Upper Peninsula. I killed the call, but the knot in my chest only tightened. I settled in, the ticking hazards the only sound in that oppressive stillness. My breath fogged in the cold cab, my fingers tapping anxiously against the steering wheel. I didn't know what it was at first, maybe just my nerves, but I saw something. A flicker of movement, just beyond the reach of the pulsing hazard lights. A shadow, low to the ground, quick and silent. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was seeing things. The darkness out here was thick, heavy. But then I saw it again, movement, a slinking shape, followed by another. My heart hammered in my chest. Then it happened. A flicker of movement, barely perceptible, just at the edge of the hazard light's glow. A shadow, low to the ground, smooth and silent as it crossed the road ahead of me. My mind clawed for logic, deer, coyote, anything, but the shape was wrong. Longer. Thicker. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into the darkness. The rhythmic ticking of the hazards suddenly felt louder. Each flash of light revealed nothing but the same twisted trees, the empty stretch of road, the black void beyond, but now, it felt hostile, like the dark wasn't just around me, but watching. I strained my eyes forward, forehead pressed to the glass, trying to see beyond the amber strobe. The stillness out there was unbearable. And then, another movement, this time to the left. A shadow again, but higher this time, like something standing upright had moved between the trees. The truck, dead and cold, felt like a paper-thin barrier between me and something out there. I flicked the headlights back on, slamming the switch hard enough to sting my palm. The beams tore through the dark, and there they were. 3 wolves. They stood in the road, massive and statuesque, their thick winter coats gleaming silver under the high beams. They weren't startled. They didn't flinch. Their yellow eyes glowed, unblinking, reflecting the light in twin orbs that stared straight into me. At their feet lay a mangled carcass, something large, maybe a deer, its body twisted and torn open, entrails a dark smear against the cold asphalt. I honked the horn, long and loud. Nothing. One of the wolves, larger than the others, lifted its head, locking its gaze with mine. Its lip curled, exposing jagged, blood-stained teeth, but there was no fear in its eyes. Only irritation. As though I was an inconvenience. A gnat buzzing in its ear. The horn died away, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness, and the wolves returned to their feast, indifferent. The air in the cab felt thinner, heavier. My breath fogged the windshield, blurring the view, so I wiped it clear with my sleeve, but the wolves were still there, their forms hunched and grotesque under the lights. I killed the headlights again, sinking the world back into darkness. The hazard lights kept ticking. I sat there for what felt like hours, my nerves fraying with each passing minute, the cold steadily seeping into the cab despite the residual warmth from the dead engine. The ticking of the hazard lights had become a metronome for my fear, each click a stark reminder that I was trapped, alone, and entirely exposed. Occasionally, I flicked the headlights back on, each time bracing for something worse, something closer, but the scene remained the same. The wolves were still there, unmoved, still gnawing at their kill with grotesque determination. Their massive jaws worked methodically, sinews stretching and snapping with every bite, their muzzles slick with dark blood that gleamed in the harsh light. They weren't eating out of hunger, there was something performative in the way they tore into the carcass, as if they knew I was watching. One of them lifted its head at one point, its blood-matted fur bristling in the cold air. It locked eyes with me, its breath steaming in thick, ragged clouds, and in that moment, I felt a pulse of something primal, like prey caught in the cold, golden stare of a predator that had time to toy with its food. It didn't blink. It didn't flinch. It simply watched. I flicked the lights off again, the darkness flooding back like a wave, swallowing everything beyond the glass. The amber hazard lights pulsed on, steady and indifferent, painting the trees in slow flashes. I clenched the steering wheel, trying to shake off the rising panic, but it crawled higher with every second, a suffocating weight that sat heavy on my chest. My phone buzzed suddenly, the violent vibration against the console making me jump hard enough that I hit my elbow on the doorframe. The screen lit up, Mechanic, the name glowing pale against the dark. I snatched it up, voice tight. "Yeah?" His voice crackled through the speaker, tinny and disinterested, like this was just another late-night call-out. "Hey, I'm about an hour out. Truck's probably something simple. Can you pop the hood? Check the battery connections for me?" I blinked at the phone, the absurdity of the question slamming into me. "No way," I snapped, my voice more shrill than I intended. "There's wolves. Right in front of me." There was a beat of silence. Then, an annoyed sigh. "Wolves don't usually mess with people." "Yeah? Well, I'm not gonna test that theory tonight." Another sigh, this one sharper. "Fine. I'll check it when I get there." He sounded like I was wasting his time, like I wasn't stranded in the freezing dark, sitting feet away from wild predators. I ended the call without another word, my thumb stabbing the screen harder than necessary. The truck felt smaller now, the walls of the cab closing in as the cold thickened. Outside, the wolves were still there, unmoved, their bodies black shapes against the pulsing flashes of amber. One of them had pulled part of the carcass further down the road, thick strands of sinew trailing behind it like ribbons, and the wet, tearing sound of flesh breaking echoed through the stillness. It was a sound I'd never heard outside of movies, raw, violent, and disturbingly final. The smell was seeping in now too, through the cracked vents, the heavy, coppery stench of blood mixed with something sourer, older. It curled in my nostrils, thick enough that I could almost taste it, and I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve. I flicked the headlights on again, this time out of a growing sense of desperation. For a second, the scene snapped back into clarity, 3 wolves, their blood-matted muzzles glowing in the harsh white light. One had its paw planted on the carcass, its claws sunk deep, its eyes reflecting the headlights in a hollow, yellow gleam. But there was something else now, something in the way their ears were pinned back, their bodies tense. They weren't just eating anymore. Locking tight. The hazard lights continued their steady tick-tick-tick, the rhythmic pulse feeling suddenly much too loud in the hush that had fallen outside. For a moment, I thought maybe the wolves had caught wind of the mechanic approaching, but then I heard it. A low, distant crack. Like a branch snapping under something heavy. Then another. Closer this time. The wolves backed away from the carcass, their bodies slinking low to the ground, ears flattened tight against their skulls. One of them gave a low growl, a guttural rumble that vibrated through the truck's floorboards. They didn't run. Not yet. But they were no longer the apex predators here. I could see it in the way they moved, slow and tense, their golden eyes darting toward the trees. Another crack. This one deep, hollow, wood splintering under serious weight. The wolves scattered. They didn't hesitate, didn't give warning. They simply bolted, gray streaks vanishing into the trees, leaving the carcass sprawled in the center of the road, its glistening entrails exposed like an offering. And then, something shattered the fragile tension. A scream. High-pitched, raw, and filled with a terror that cut deep into my bones. It tore through the dead stillness of the night, so sudden and so close that it felt like it was inside the cab with me, reverberating through the metal walls and into my chest. It wasn't human, not entirely, but there was a sickening, warped quality to it, a twisted mimicry of human anguish that made my stomach turn. The pitch was too sharp, the rise and fall of it jagged and broken, as if something that had never known a human voice was trying to imitate one and getting it horribly, terrifyingly wrong. My entire body locked up, every muscle seizing in instinctual, animal fear. My breath hitched, shallow and rapid, misting the windshield in frantic bursts. I sat paralyzed for half a heartbeat, then the impact came. Bam! Something massive slammed into the side of the truck with brutal force, the sound a deafening metallic clang that ricocheted through the cab. The entire box rocked sideways, the heavy suspension shrieking as the weight of the blow forced the truck onto 2 wheels for a split second before it slammed back down. The whole vehicle swayed like a drunk, the force of the hit throwing me sideways into the doorframe so hard it knocked the air from my lungs. The seatbelt dug deep into my shoulder, a sharp, burning pressure that barely anchored me as the truck groaned under the strain. I could feel it, whatever had hit me, it wasn't small. This wasn't a deer or a bear. It wasn't some stray branch or debris. This was deliberate. Something had charged the truck. Panic surged in a white-hot wave, snapping me into motion. My hands scrambled over the controls, fingers slick with sweat, fumbling at the dashboard. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, fast and erratic, almost drowning out the labored creak of the truck's frame as it settled back onto its axles. I found the light switches and slammed them on, all of them. Headlights, fog lights, hazard strobes, anything that would push the darkness back. The cab was instantly flooded with blinding light, harsh beams cutting through the void. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips as I yanked the gearshift into reverse, my palms slipping against the worn plastic. The backup lights flared on, 2 ghostly white cones slicing into the dense tree line behind me, illuminating the road and the skeletal brush beyond. The light reflected off wet patches on the asphalt, blood from the carcass the wolves had left behind, creating slick, gleaming ribbons that snaked across the blacktop. But there was nothing there. No movement. But then, a shadow. Massive. Fast. It bolted across the road, cutting through the headlights like a dark blade, too quick for me to get a good look. 1 second, there was nothing but the endless blacktop, and the next, a hulking form exploded out of the tree line, its shape distorted by speed and distance. I caught the faint glint of something slick, fur, scales, before it vanished into the woods on the other side, swallowed by darkness as if it had never been there. But it had been there. The truck's headlights seemed weaker now, as if the very act of seeing that thing had drained them, the beams flickering at the edges. My mind twisted in on itself, desperate for logic, for some explanation that didn't immediately unravel into panic. But there was nothing. No reasonable answer. I sat there, rigid, my hands clenching the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. My pulse pounded in my ears, each beat an urgent, staccato rhythm that seemed to sync with the hazard lights ticking in the background. That wasn't a wolf. I forced my eyes forward again, swallowing hard against the dry knot forming in my throat, and flicked my gaze back to where the wolves had been. Gone. Every last one of them. The bloodied patch of road where they had fed was now an empty smear of dark stains on the asphalt, the mangled carcass of whatever they had been eating left twisted and half devoured. Long, wet ribbons of entrails glistened under the lights, but the wolves themselves, those massive, unshaken predators that had refused to flinch beneath the blaring horn, had disappeared. They hadn't wandered off. They hadn't retreated. They had fled. They'd abandoned their kill. Every nature documentary I'd ever watched flooded back to me. Wolves don't abandon food unless there's something much, much higher on the food chain nearby. The claw marks left in the dirt where they had launched themselves into the woods were deep and frantic, gouging the frozen ground like they had scrambled to get away. From what, though? A chill crawled its way up my spine, cold fingers brushing the nape of my neck. Predators don't run from competition. Not unless there's something far worse. Something they know instinctively they can't challenge. I sat there, every nerve on fire, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Something was out there. In the trees. I could hear it. Branches cracking. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. It wasn't trying to be quiet. The mechanic finally arrived, his headlights slicing through the suffocating dark like a lifeline, the beams stark and almost blinding against the deep black of the forest. The twin cones of light cut across the road, momentarily illuminating the twisted trees and the mangled carcass that still lay sprawled on the asphalt. I'd never been so relieved to see another person in my life. The harsh hum of his diesel engine felt like a heartbeat in the dead air, the first real sound in what felt like hours of oppressive silence. He pulled his truck in front of mine, his headlights bouncing off the trees, casting long, warped shadows that seemed to stretch and recoil as the beams swept past them. I could make out his silhouette through the windshield as he hesitated for a moment before finally cracking his door open. He stepped out, slowly, cautiously, like he could feel the weight of the night pressing in around him. The outline of his figure was cut in sharp contrast against the headlights, his breath fogging in the cold air. And then, we both heard it, the scream again. This time, it was closer. So much closer. It erupted from the treeline to our right, tearing through the stillness with a guttural ferocity that made the previous screams sound almost distant in comparison. It was raw, furious, laced with something deeper than pain, rage. The sound vibrated in my chest, low and heavy at its core, but climbing into a shriek so high and piercing it felt like it could shatter glass. The mechanic didn't hesitate. He slammed his door shut with a heavy thud that echoed over the trees, metal on metal, the panic in his movements so obvious it sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline tearing through me. My phone vibrated violently in my hand a second later, the caller ID flashing his number. I picked it up before the first ring ended. "You heard that, right?" I hissed, my voice shaking. "What the fuck was that?" he practically shouted, his voice trembling hard. I could hear the panic in it, real and raw, like he was struggling to hold it together. "That wasn't a damn wolf, man." "No shit," I snapped back, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. There was silence on the line for a moment, broken only by the distant ticking of my hazards and the low rumble of his idling engine. Then he whispered, "It's still out there." I could almost feel his fear through the phone. It was real, thick, the kind that hit you at a bone-deep level when your body finally catches up with the fact that it's in danger. "I'm not getting out of this truck," he muttered, more to himself than me. "Good. Don't," I answered, glancing at my mirrors, scanning the blackness that pressed in on both sides of the road. The weight of the situation hit hard then. Neither of us knew what the hell was out there, but it wasn't something we were equipped to handle. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything that should have been out here. He didn't wait for me to say anything else. "I'm calling the cops." "Yeah," I breathed, "do that." I heard the mechanical beep of his phone switching calls before the line went dead. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the way my heartbeat had surged into my throat. I was hyper-aware of the thin layer of metal and glass that separated me from the cold, open night, and from it. The shadows around the trees felt heavier now, like they were thickening, coiling into something tangible. The scream still rang in my ears. Minutes stretched long and brittle, my nerves stretched to their snapping point as I sat there, my eyes flitting from mirror to mirror, from the dark space in front of me to the blinding lights of the mechanic's truck. I couldn't tell if it was the cold or the adrenaline making me shake now. Then the line of the trees shifted. It wasn't the wind, there was none. Something moved back there, a deep, deliberate heave in the underbrush, followed by a heavy snap as another branch gave under something impossibly large. The sound was dense, wet almost, like the trees themselves were groaning under the weight of whatever was moving through them. I caught the faintest glint of eyes again, high up this time. Too high for a wolf. Too high for anything natural. I swallowed hard, forcing bile back down as my mind scrambled for logic it wouldn't find. The mechanic's voice buzzed back in my ear a minute later. "They're on their way," he said, his tone strained, flat with fear. 10 minutes, maybe. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. "Don't move," I warned him. Wasn't planning to. But the woods weren't quiet anymore. Whatever was out there, it wasn't waiting. It was circling. I could hear it, the snapping of branches, the heavy drag of something massive through the underbrush. It didn't care that we knew it was there. And that was worse. It wanted us to know. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each second drawn out under the suffocating weight of fear and anticipation. My heart thudded against my ribs in a relentless rhythm, the cab now filled with the stale, metallic scent of sweat, despite the cold. Every tiny creak of the truck's frame, every gust of wind against the metal skin, felt amplified, sinister, as though the night itself was pushing inward, trying to get inside. Then, finally, salvation, flashing lights, distant at first, like two tiny orbs in the endless black. But they grew brighter, faster, until the unmistakable red and blue strobes of two Michigan State Police cruisers punched through the darkness, their beams cutting jagged slices into the trees. Their engines roared against the oppressive stillness, the sound a lifeline, grounding me to something familiar, something human. Gravel crunched under their tires as they skidded to a stop, their headlights blazing over my truck and the mangled mess still smeared across the road. The swirling lights turned the surrounding trees into towering silhouettes, flickering red and blue shadows that seemed to dance in anticipation of something worse. The cruiser doors swung open, the officers stepping out with that practiced air of authority, but I could see the shift in their body language almost instantly, the subtle pause as they scanned the scene, the way their hands hovered a little too close to their weapons. They weren't here for a traffic accident. They felt it too, that something wasn't right. Floodlights snapped on, blinding at first, their brutal white beams washing over the forest like a sterile wave, the stark contrast laying bare every twisted branch, every snapped twig, every glistening smear of blood on the cracked asphalt. The woods, once an impenetrable wall of black, now stood naked and raw beneath the searing light. I finally pushed the truck door open. The cold slapped me immediately, sharp and clean, but the burn in my lungs felt almost welcome. My legs, stiff from hours of tension, buckled as I stepped down, barely catching myself on the edge of the cab. My boots crunched on the frosted ground, the noise sharp in the dead air. My entire body felt wrong, heavy and light all at once, as though I'd left part of myself inside the truck. I barely had time to breathe before it came again. That scream. But this time, it was distant, still razor-sharp, still raw and violent, but further away. It cut through the trees like a blade, trailing off into the deeper dark, its edges fraying as it echoed back across the hills. The air felt colder after it ended, like the sound itself had dragged the temperature down with it. The officers froze. They didn't ask questions. Didn't dismiss it as an animal or the wind. One of them, a tall man with a clean-shaven jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching, pulled his sidearm and flicked his flashlight toward the source of the sound. The beam cut deep into the trees, its narrow cone shaking just slightly in his grip. "Jesus Christ," the other muttered, low and sharp, his breath fogging out in thick plumes. They spread out, but not far. They stayed close to the cruisers, their boots crunching on the frost-laden gravel as they scanned the woods, flashlights sweeping in wide arcs. Their beams barely touched the thick underbrush before the darkness swallowed the light again. I could tell they were spooked, the way their shoulders hunched, the quick, darting movements of their flashlights. Their training was fighting their instincts, but not winning. They searched the immediate area, weapons drawn, moving with deliberate caution, but there was nothing. No footprints, no claw marks, no branches torn aside, just the aftermath of chaos with no clear origin. The road, slick with blood, the bent frame of my truck, the deep indentation where something had slammed into it, but no evidence of what. They didn't say it out loud, but I could see it on their faces. They expected something. Something bigger. And the fact that they found nothing? That scared them more. The mechanic, who had been sitting tight in his cab the whole time, finally cracked his door open, creeping out with all the subtlety of a man who wanted nothing more than to vanish back into town. He carried his toolbox like a shield, glancing over his shoulder with every other step as he made his way to the front of my truck. "Pop the hood," he called out, voice tight. I did. The latch groaned as it released, the hood snapping upward like it was reluctant to move. He worked fast, wrench in hand, but his head kept darting back to the tree line, shoulders rigid. Every time a branch shifted in the cold wind, he flinched. Every crack from the woods had him gripping his tool tighter, eyes wide beneath the brim of his cap. Then it came again, the scream, but this time it was faint, almost ghostly, drifting on the wind like a dying echo. It was further out, deeper into the forest, but no less chilling. And then another, further still. Like whatever it was had lost interest in us, but was still hunting something out there. The officers stilled again, heads tilting toward the sound, but they didn't follow it. Neither of them wanted to go into that darkness. "Whatever it is," the taller one muttered, "it's moving off." The mechanic worked quickly, glancing over his shoulder the entire time. That scream echoed through the trees twice more, each time fainter, retreating deeper into the woods. The mechanic didn't say a word. He tightened the last bolt with a violent twist, slammed my hood shut, and all but jogged back to his own truck. "You're good to go," he barked, not looking back. I didn't hesitate. I climbed into the cab, slamming the door shut hard enough that the glass rattled. My fingers shook as I shoved the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. The officers stayed put, floodlights still cutting through the night as I eased the truck into gear. The scream didn't come again. But as I rolled past the mangled carcass still lying on the road, my headlights caught something fresh in the gore, a set of deep claw marks carved into the exposed ribcage. Massive. Too deep for wolves. I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. The next morning, in the safety of the hotel parking lot, I inspected the truck. On the side panel, 7 feet off the ground, was a deep indentation. Something massive had slammed into it, something with the strength to dent fiberglass but not tear through. I traced my fingers along the warped metal, cold creeping up my spine. I don't know what was out there that night. A predator that didn't belong to any field guide or nature book. But whatever it was real. One thing's for sure, I will never drive through the Upper Peninsula at night again.